Hi, Diane and Samuel. So great to have you here today.
It's really
Great.
great to hear, Marco.
Yeah,
Awesome. I'm
great.
really excited to talk about all the amazing work that you all are doing in supporting organizations to be more diverse and equitable and inclusive, as well as what this looks like in this context of integrating anti-racist practices into the organization. So to kick it off, I'd love for you to just share, and we can start with Diana. Tell the listeners a little bit about yourself and the work that you do.
Awesome. So Diana Marie Lee, she, they pronouns. Um, I'm originally from Oklahoma, but grew up in the San Francisco Bay Area, and I'm now in Miami, Florida. And Samuel and I co-lead Sweet Livity together. I'm the founding CEO and Alchemist, which means I make magic happen. So I definitely focus on relationship building and partnership development. And if I had to like simply say what Sweet Liberty does is we help people doing good work in the world do that without sacrificing their values and their well-being. And increasingly, I would say over the last 4 to 5 years, increasingly that has included helping workspaces become more equitable for everyone that's there, so that everybody not only has um, opportunities to succeed and thrive there, but that people can actually show up as their full authentic selves in the workplace and be valued, contribute from all of their intersecting identities, and be appreciated for what they bring to the table.
Amazing. I love it. And then Samuel would love to hear your role and the type of work that you do within Sweet Livity.
Yes, I'm a co-founder with Sweet Livity, so I've been in since the beginning. My role is to do those two things: is to lead and sort of carry the vision of the founders of Sweet Livity. I work directly with the clients, so we do a lot of organizational development work, strategic planning. My official title, I think, is co-lead, co-founder, creative strategist, and digital wizard. So I have a tech background, so I have some of that as well.
Love it.
And I make magic in different ways that complement Diana.
That's right.
So yeah.
I love it. I love it. So then if someone like a business, and do you work with both businesses and nonprofits?
Mhm.
Okay. So if either of those types of organizations or business comes to you all and they're looking to try, even at a higher level, do their work better and make it more equitable, what does that look like? What are the type of organizations that are typically coming to you all?
Mhm. So we work with a range of organizations, Marcos, right? So definitely nonprofit, for-profit, academic, governmental. So for us, it's not as important their organizational structure as what is the work. So the first thing we look for is values alignment. Like
Mhm.
we just based on the makeup of our network, we're all people of color who have intersecting identities that are often marginalized or oppressed in society and have definitely been on all of our own healing journeys around the harm that we all experience in different workplaces, including workplaces that we created ourselves. So part of what we listen for when people reach out to us is a couple things. Sometimes people reach out to us because an incident has happened or some harm has happened that they're acknowledging and they want help to navigate that situation. Other folks have more of a general sense that they'd like to do more around racial justice with an intersectionality approach, but they don't actually really know where to start. And then there's some who might come to us with a more general request around building their organizational capacity to deepen the social impact of their work. But they don't even necessarily think initially that there needs to be attention to racial justice with an intersectionality approach. I don't know, Sam, if there's anything you'd add to that.
Only that we also do individual coaching that
Ah,
is
yeah.
even outside of organizational structures. So yeah.
Yeah, and I think that's definitely an important element as well, right? So you're kind of thinking about organizations are simply a makeup of people. I think people tend to think about structure and culture, all these to a certain extent abstract kind of things, but at the end of the day, they're kind of individuals. And I think the other side of it is that everybody's on their own journey at different points. And sometimes you might need that coaching and to support leaders to help guide people while you're not working with them, right? What do you feel as organizations are coming to you all, or as you're kind of seeing out in the workplace, some of the bigger challenges that organizations may be facing in order to try to integrate these types of practices?
Mm-hmm. I think there's a lot of challenges that we'll see, so I'll name one, and then Sam will let you dig in.
We'll go back and forth.
Yeah, we could do that. I think one challenge, Marcos, that we often see is that people have this idea that this work needs to be a top-down approach, meaning it's important to work with the C-suite level or the managers or supervisors first as a way to shift the culture. And what we have to share with people to see if they're open to a new way of imagining how we would work with them is that it's a more of a grassroots approach. So the way that we think about it is that when you're thinking about culture shift work, which is what we do, right? That requires everybody in the organization to see themselves as a leader in doing that work. And so what we do is what we call co-design. So co-design is a particular way that we work with groups where we want to share power with them and encourage the power holders in the organization or the company to share power with the rest of the staff or the other stakeholders. So what we ideally will do is work with them to identify across all of their stakeholders, how can we put together a team of people who demographically and based on their delegated power, based on their positional role, how can we create a group that is diverse enough and inclusive enough to hold the work with Sweet Livity? Mm-hmm.
Gotcha. And I think you're making me see, I think people will take that leadership approach and then, it'll trickle down. But I definitely think like there is those elements that if people are not ready, and I think the other side is if you're going to be making these changes, we'd love to get your thoughts. Some people may see this as a threat on so many different levels, individually, organizationally. So you really have to also bring those people into the conversation. And like you said, they have a stake in what this change might be.
Yes, because a lot of times, those of us in power, we're used to believing that we have our finger on the pulse of what people in the company or the organization need. And the way we reframe that is that there's no good decision you'll make within the walls of your office or within the confines of that C-suite level team. So we're trying to break down that hierarchy from the very beginning in how we work with folks and allow them to imagine that the number one thing to do to start off this work is to listen. So what we want to do is create with them a co-design team that works with us to create that listening process, including the content of the questions themselves, so that there's buy-in from the beginning that we're about to go on a learning journey. And the first step in this learning journey together, collectively, is for us to listen. Create this sacred space for people to be listened to, so that we as Sweet Livity have a better sense collectively of everybody's experience in that workspace and the degree to which they are challenged or supported to bring their full authentic selves into the workplace and to actually succeed there.
Yeah, and I want to dive a little bit deeper into a couple things you're saying is that there's definitely the element of the listening, right? And to get a lot of the information. But I think the other side is creating a space where people feel open, feel heard, and feel visible. And that hopefully creates trust and a safe place. Oh, I go ahead.
So Sam, were you about to go?
No, I was clearing my throat. But I can also give another challenge. One of the challenges, and it's not surprising, is money to finance sort of the shifts that they want to make within the organization.
Yeah.
But even on top of that, what we're seeing is that the organizations that we work with that are Black led or Black owned are far less resourced than the white organizations, and so there's a spectrum. But we're noticing that as a challenge. We love to center Black owned businesses, Black business leaders, Black folks, uh, indigenous folks, and people of color. And we're seeing that their resources don't go as far as the organizations that are run or owned by white leaders. And so that's been a challenge for us as well.
Yeah, and even diving a little bit more into that financial piece, I think it's making me think about, and this might be changing based on everything that's happening with the pandemic and kind of the racial injustice that's happened in 2020. But there's like resources as a whole, but then it's also taking into account or putting or marking off resources for this type of work. I think that's kind of the first thing, and as opposed to just being a side benefit, it being core. And then I think the second, and let me know what you all think from a finance standpoint, is that people underestimating how long this is actually going to take. It's not like they're going to bring you all in and then in like a month, everything's good to go and it's puppy dogs and ice cream after that and rainbows. So what is that looking like, I guess, from a financial standpoint of people making this a priority or actually budgeting the proper amount?
It's definitely like a back and forth conversation, because we do kind of have to come in and align the expectation, because a lot of folks are now like, oh, we're not doing anything around diversity, equity, and inclusion. And so they want this one-off training, maybe a 2-day summit or something. And we definitely don't do that. In Diana's wonderful words, we create experiences and curate experiences for you to have these paradigm shifts that then begin to shift your culture. But it's definitely a 6-month to a year to 2-year engagement that we're looking for if you're serious about the work.
And I think the other thing, Sam, listening to you, that I would add, Marcos, is that a lot of times people feel a sense of urgency when there's been an incident that happened. Maybe they're losing staff, they're not able to retain folks, or just in the moment we're in, socially and politically, there's the sense of we should be doing something right away. And what we encourage people to hold is this idea that we have to work at what we call the speed of trust. So it needs to start slow, like almost like a soft launch. It needs to start slow enough for there to be this co-creation process, for people to feel like, oh, maybe I'm willing to open my heart and share honestly my experience here. And then for us to actually do that listening and then collectively work with them to make meaning of what we hear. And so it is this idea of helping people slow down enough to create a container that can hold this work for the long run. Because a lot of the skills that people will learn working with us through that co-design process, that co-creation process, and the listening process, those are adaptable skills that they can transfer to any of the leadership roles that people might have in the organization or the company. And we think of every single person who works with you and for you as a leader. So there's a capacity for everyone to lead, regardless of their positional title and role.
Yeah, that's really interesting to think when you're thinking about a concept of an experience that's going to be a catalyst, as opposed to being this super big bang. And again, I learned so much, I'm going to like implement it, and then it kind of fades away. Thinking about it, I appreciate that in terms of that kind of soft launch. As equity, diversity, and inclusion in this work has evolved over kind of decades, but now what's been happening in 2020, how have you seen organizations change in terms of the type of work that they want to do or they want to integrate, especially with the injustices that have taken place in 2020?
I don't know if we're seeing as much change, Sam. I wonder what you'd say. I don't know if we're seeing as much change in terms of how they approach us, but I am witnessing a change amongst our team of what we're willing to say no to.
Oh, interesting. Yeah.
So I think for us, we're looking for an openness to co-creating a process, and for people to understand that as skilled as our team is, and we have a team of 13 people who are part of this co-op, and then we have other folks we tap in sometimes. But no matter what wisdom and experience we're bringing to the table, they collectively have more years of experience inside the culture of that organization or company. And so a lot of what we're doing with them in the beginning is helping them connect the indigenous wisdom that's right there in their organization, and to trust that if you actually connect the wisdom, not just from working there, so like all the years of people, that's a lot of years, but then people's lived experiences. And a lot of people don't necessarily acknowledge the value of a process that can help people bring their lived experiences into the conversation. And so I think that's, so for us in this moment in particular, especially because a lot of us in past years, Marcos, got burned out doing this kind of work.
Yeah, yeah.
Particularly, you got burned out because people weren't willing to do the work to change. So in this moment, we're only working with groups who are willing to name and express openness, listening first, and then co-designing some process for a culture shift.
Yeah. And I think you're making me think about, it's interesting because I'm thinking about this on an individual, like kind of organizational level, then on a larger economic level. And there are going to be it's working with organizations that are willing to do the work and go deep and transform. And then hopefully those organizations become the standard or the model that other organizations have to live up to. And like you said, there's only so much work that you can do and you don't want to get burnt out. So that's really interesting. Sam, anything else that you wanted to kind of share? What are from 2020, have you seen any changes within this space in terms of work or what organizations are looking for?
Yeah, I would agree, Diana, that we don't really, I don't see a change. And that for me is part of a deeper problem. No offense or no, just to say that in our experience over the years, people are sort of still acting in the same ways that even though we're in a pandemic, even though we're in a really, really pivotal moment for the Black Lives Matter movement, they say the final throes of capitalism, like all of these major shifts are happening globally and not just in the US. And folks are still kind of like, oh, well, let's plan this, 2-day training or whatever, and we'll check the box and we'll just continue to go along as usual. And so there's a shift in the sense of urgency or what's urgent in the moment. And the shift still needs to come to say, this is real, deep, entrenched work that we have to build into the organizational structure. The outgoing messages that a lot of folks are putting up, like Black Lives Matter, we support them, and internally the people of color in your organization are still suffering. It's like there's a disconnect, and so that's the thing that I want to see move.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it emphasizes the fact that this is not easy work. And I think that's what in terms of the conversation of just like expectations of just recognizing that, again, it's not a 1 month. And I appreciate that you have, when the companies you work with, it has to be for such an extended period of time, because a single training or reading one book is not necessarily gonna do the job. Yeah. What are there particular sizes of organizations that you all tend to work with?
It's a range. So we work with really grassroots groups that have maybe only started a couple years ago or beginning to form, and they actually want to figure out these issues early on. So in a way, for them, it's more part of their initial business development and strategic planning process. It seems like our sweet spot has been historically small businesses with less than about 150 employees. I would say in the last couple of years, there's been some shift in that, where we're also working with slightly larger companies that have maybe up to 500 employees. So we're learning a lot about what it means to scale our work, to work with those larger companies. I think the main thing that we're learning as we scale is helping people really open up their minds to how the process can engage everyone, right? So, once you start getting over 250, you're like, ooh, how do we do that? And so a
Yeah.
lot of times we have to be creative with folks. It's interesting. I'm thinking about a conversation, Sam, we had with someone recently where they realized that if they reimagine the way they were framing the work from being more around leadership development to more like community development and helping them actually deepen the social impact of their work, not just also attending to the needs of the employees, it helped them reimagine it as an investment versus an expense. In other cases with smaller budget size companies or organizations, we actually will collaborate with them around resource mobilization. So we're actually working with some companies and organizations right now where we're helping them draw down workforce development dollars or access other streams of funding to support them to work with us and other capacity builders that they want to bring in.
Yeah, that's a really, I'd love to get any of your thoughts, Sam, is like that's a really interesting mindset shift of thinking this is an expense, this is a side thing that we have to do versus this is a long, and not just investment, like long-term investment, and recognize that when these shifts are made long-term, the business is going to operate more effectively. They're probably going to be more innovative. People are going to be happier. They're going to have greater well-being because they're going to be less sick. And how do you, I guess one question I have is that how do you make that shift with someone that is a decision maker, and it might be from you all? And then the other is, if I'm a person at an organization that wants to make this change that might be at a lower part of the organization, how do I have those conversations with decision makers to try to help them work with someone like you all?
Yeah, I think it starts with our what we call discovery calls, our sort of intake calls. And that sometimes is with the decision makers, and sometimes it's not. Usually it is, because that they're the ones that are interested in doing the work. And I think initially in that hour call, we can tell that they lean in a different way because we lead in a different way. We create a very specific space, and we've had many business leader almost tears in the talks that we've had. So we just begin to start to create a human space where folks can share what they're holding, and they don't even realize that they're holding it until they're given the opportunity to share it. And so that's where it shifts for them. That right there, it's like that heart shift. It's like, oh, I see what you're trying to build here, and if I can do this with my organization as a whole, then yes, I'm in. And I think that's like sort of the initial piece. And Diana, I wonder if there's more that you would add in terms of what's next.
I think what I love about what you're saying, and what I would add, Marcos, is that we do bring a trauma-informed approach, a compassion fatigue awareness approach to our work. And so because of that, we are intuitive in terms of being able to, even on a discovery call, to sense the level of stress and trauma that people are holding as they think about wanting to shift their workplace culture, maybe not knowing how to do it. Maybe they've tried many things already and they haven't worked. So they've lost a little bit of hope. Maybe there's been some harm that's happened in their previous efforts where now they're a little tentative, but they still risk reaching out. And a lot of what we do is help people understand there's a difference between safety and bravery. And so we often talk about what it means to create braver spaces with each other where we can really be courageous and have honest conversations. And I think as they experience that with us and our team members on those discovery calls, for a lot of them, they say, I feel better. I don't know what had happened here. But a shift happened even just in this conversation where I actually feel like something's doable. like actually I could
Yeah.
see light at the end of the tunnel, that maybe there's something that we could do together that could actually really make a difference for everybody, including me. Because a lot of times we're talking to folks who, in this time, they might carry identities um, that are seen as privileged, advantaged, the oppressor. And so they're like, is this for me? Right? And we're like, no, this is for everybody. We were all born into a system that was never meant to be liberating for everybody. And
Yeah.
all of us created our organizations and companies within that system. So this is about us all dismantling all the ways we've been harmed, and how can we do that together so that everybody's free. You know, everybody deserves to breathe inside their organization.
Yeah, I can see these calls, or someone who reaches out to you or to have one of these calls, and kind of coming at it from two approaches. One, like you just shared, they're going through this, whatever this is, or the context that they're coming from psychologically and emotionally, and then they might be coming more on a tactical side. How am I going to do this for the organization? And creating that space for them to kind of share, and just like you mentioned, be listened to and feel vulnerable and be visible. That shifts in them. And I think then, like you said, if that happens, there might be hope for them to carry this on into the organization. Um, I would love, oh, were you going to say something, Diana?
Well, one thing I would say is that, I don't know, I wouldn't call it a trend, but I would say, Sam, it's a pattern we're noticing. You know, for folks listening, I definitely would encourage you, when you reach out to folks like Sweet Livity, others, like, to share as much as you can. So what I'm going to say about that is, we've had a lot of groups lately who have staff who have been organizing to form a union. It doesn't matter whether it's a nonprofit or a for-profit. There seems to be an increasing percentage of workers who are organizing to say, there's something about this workplace that's not working for us, and we want to have more voice in the decisions that impact our day-to-day experience as a worker here. And so what we're learning is, how do people share that with us, especially when you're just meeting someone for the first or second time on a discovery call or two, and you're like, how much can we honestly share? So what we find is, there's what they share in the beginning, which is actually a lot. And then once we sign, then there's a whole nother level of sharing that happens.
Ah,
Right? There's like the reveal. So I would just encourage folks, as you're listening, like, share as much as you can up front, because you know, the work is only as good as what you bring to the table.
absolutely, absolutely. I'd love for each of you to just share, how did you actually get into doing this work? I know there's some people that are listening that might be interested on going down this career path, and if you can share the experiences and the work that's informed the work that you're doing, that'd be great.
I'll go first. So it's a long journey. And I don't want to like go all the way back. I was born in, but it's kind of that idea. So I am Afro, Indigenous, Mexican, queer. I'm an artist. I always have I have hidden disabilities. So there's a lot of intersections that I hold and that I've held throughout my life that have put me in places where I have either had to build a bridge for people to understand the other, or I have had to sort of be silent and invisibilize parts of me, and just listen to the rhetoric that people have, or the attitudes, and some hatred, right? And so that was the inception. That's the beginning. And then every organization and every position I've held in my career, I've been in higher ed, for-profit, nonprofit, the tech field. I drove a school bus. In all of these iterations, I was one of the people that would bridge these gaps, and just began to create understanding, and sort of hold up. No, that's like, you can't really say that. That's kind of offensive, you know. And so that's the trajectory, and then becoming or leaning into my role as a teacher. That then gave me a bigger platform to do that, and then leaning further into my identity as a healer. That then sort of sealed it, and I was like, okay, all of these pieces have to go together, because this is what people need to actually make those shifts. And so that's kind of where I came into doing this work. Even in IT, I was teaching about, because the tech field is very like, there's terms like master and slave and like
Absolutely, yeah.
right, domains, and like there's this very, very racialized terms, and so just undoing all of that has been part of my life's journey.
Amazing.
Yeah, every time you share more of your story, I just have to take a moment and just say, I see you, you know, I really see you, Sam. I feel you. Yeah. I think what comes up for me, you know, Marcos, to your question is, it goes back to childhood. My brother, sister, and I, growing up in Richard, California, we were what people call latchkey kids, meaning, you know, your single mother was working and you had to come home from school and then take care of things, you know, food and homework until they could get home from work. And I just remember the times that it was getting dark and late and we were like, where's mom? And then we would later find out that she had had some traumatic work experience that caused her to go to the emergency room before she could make it home. And so I think it comes from just witnessing that from so many people in my family, like, didn't really understand it, but like stress, work, kind of putting them together. Then fast forward, if I look at myself, I started working at the age of 16. And up until the creation of Sweet Livity, every job I ever had, including when I co-created a nonprofit, I was either fired from or quit. And it was always based on some injustice. And so when the last place I ever worked for, the National Community Development Institute, loved the work. We were doing this amazing community development in low-income communities around the country. But we were working so hard. We were working 60, 80-hour work weeks.
Mm-hmm.
We were traveling all the time. And we felt the sacrifice was worth it. But I got to a point where I felt like something was off and I couldn't quite understand it. And I tried, but I just couldn't figure out like how to get healthy and hold on to my values and work there. And so I got to a point where I said, you know, Marcos, I said, if I stay here, I'm either literally not going to survive because I was getting so sick, or I'm not going to like the person I'm going to have to become to stay here and thrive in this workplace culture, which is actually toxic. And we were all people of color, right? Mind you, right? So I went on a healing journey in 2009, left a 6-figure job with benefits. Didn't know what was going to happen, but I just had to go. And I went on a healing journey, lived in Belize for a while. And when I started to recover through holistic health and rest, my well-being and my sense of joy and passion and purpose, I was like, what would it look like to integrate the holistic health that helped me regain my sense of self into what we used to do? And so Sweet Livity has been this experiment ever since, you know, Sam and I and others launched this thing. Like, what can it mean for people to actually not have to tear down their health, their finances, their time with family and friends to do amazing good work? And I'll be honest, like from the time I was a kid, I have always believed that Declaration of Independence actually really meant something to me. Like when I heard life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness, I was like, oh yeah, I'm on for that. But then I don't see most people experiencing that in their workplace. And honestly, the majority of us have to work for a living. It's not a choice. So when you have to spend so much of your life working, it has to be in a way that allows you to thrive and be well, and that you actually leave work with more prosperity and wellness and connection than when you entered. So it's really this vision of revolutionizing what it means to work and how to create workspaces in a way that really centers our human dignity.
Yeah, absolutely. And reframing what is the purpose of work? I think what you pointed out is like, is it enhancing our well-being or is it detracting? And I think the work that you're doing is how do you create the infrastructure in the space, but also provide the pathways for people, because at the end of the day, organizations are just people accomplishing a mission to be enhanced by the work that they do. Amazing. As we wrap this up, for those people that are listening that are thinking about wanting to make these changes in their organization at kind of any different level, are there particular steps, aside from booking a discovery call with you all, are there kind of key things to think about, or next steps that they should be doing in order to move their organization in this direction?
For sure.
Want to go, Sam? Great.
There's definitely so it's hard to speak to, because your organization unto itself is unique,
Yeah.
and then you have the for-profit, the nonprofit, higher ed. All of these things have different ways of functioning. I think one of the pieces is just to really there's this idea that diversity means people of color. Let's bring in more people of color, and that'll change everything. That's not how it works, because your culture is there already, and that's kind of the issue. So if you're bringing people into a culture, even people of color, they're expected to assimilate, so to speak. And so if your culture is where the toxicity lies and the hardness lies, then we need to look at that holistically first. And then, so the diversity then is around your skills that you already have inside, right? We use the indigenous practice of the medicine wheel, which describes the different types of personalities that you work with, so that we understand who's a visionary, who's the detail oriented, right? Because this is diversity. If we have a whole team of like what we call eagles that are visions, and like we have these big huge plans and let's fly, but nobody's doing the work on the ground to like actually build the structures, then you're not going to really achieve the things that you're planning. So there's a way to think about diversity differently than just race or ethnicity, and then that just leans into the other pieces around what is inclusion, right? Because that's part of the DEI stuff, and inclusion includes people who have disabilities, not just visible disabilities. So I show up, and this is a true story. I show up with, I battle with depression, anxiety, PTSD. These are real issues, and that I have a professional that I talk to, and they show up, when they want to. There's not always a trigger. It just is the way that the body is holding the trauma that I've experienced. And so how do you make spaces for folks? Because we are all in trauma. We see that repeatedly in workspaces, and we're bringing our trauma from family or outside into the workplace, and then we're repeating patterns. So how does inclusion look like when you're looking at folks who are neurodivergent and, just different ways of being? So those are two pieces, and I'll kick it over to you, Diana.
Yeah, I love what you said, Sarah. Maybe what I would add is, everyone listening, this is a lifelong journey, right? This is long haul work to like unpack all the ways that we're blocked from accessing each other and connecting with each other, and connecting the wisdom that we all have because of our intersecting identities. So what I would encourage people to think about is, Sweet Livity will accompany you for some period of time, right? And we would figure out what that period of time is. But really, this is your work to hold and own and invest in. And so a lot of what we think about is how we leave capacity on the ground, as we call it. So for people to be thinking about like what we're trying to do is, as we accompany you over time, build your capacity to continue this work on your own. Like figure out how this work around racial justice and DI becomes embedded in the core of your company or your organization. So it's not seen as something we bring in every now and then when we need to, but it becomes a core part of your business to pay attention to these things.
Absolutely, absolutely, and I think you and the work that you're doing, as we kind of talked about earlier, is as you work with organizations to do this and more do this, hopefully this becomes the standard. And I know that you all are B Corps, and that's part of that process as well, is how do we ensure that organizations are creating the spaces where everybody can bring their full selves, and that in turn is going to be able to grow the businesses. So thank you so much, Diana and Samuel, for all the amazing work that you're doing. And people can find you at sweetlivity.com, correct?
That is correct.
Amazing. Thank you so much.
We're also the B Corp, so people can go on B Lab's website as well and find us there.
And learn more information about like overall why you all are B Corp and your score and everything. So thank you so much, Diana and Samuel. We appreciate all the work that you're doing.
Take care.
Thank you.
Bye. Ciao.